Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I am very excited to be moderating this panel on cultural exchange between Sub-Saharan Africa and the Gulf, and to introduce our speakers today. Kavita is an Indian-born, London-educated art collector who founded Art House Contemporary, an auction house based in Lagos that focuses on modern and contemporary art from West Africa. Nina is the CEO and co-founder of All Africa Festival, where she has curated events that promote the spirit of Africa since 2018. And Daudi founded Afria Art Gallery in 2002 with a focus on advancing careers of African contemporary artists and facilitating collaborations globally. I'm very excited to be here and to kind of kick off this conversation. I have a set of questions that I have prepared, and I think that before we kind of get started, it's important for you each to define your roles on a more kind of personal note as cultural instigators or cultural promoters. Whoever would like to start, I'm happy to pass on.
Hello. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. My role in the ecosystem. Well, in art from Africa, or art in Africa for that matter, there's gaps that when you talk about contemporary art and the art market and the art world, there are these gaps that have existed for a very long time. Not the creation of art, but the gaps in the selling or the market for that matter. So 20 years ago, my role, which I didn't think would be, sort of has evolved into helping fill those gaps. And it comes from assisting artists in the production of art, art that would be on international standards, and then bringing visibility to that art through the market globally, and then archiving it, and then so my role is to add value to the artists from Africa in order to participate in the global scene.
Fantastic, thank you.
Hello, thank you for having me here today. My name is Kavita Chellaram, and just a little bit of our story was that there was really hardly any galleries and visibility of artists in Nigeria up to like the early 2000s. And what we tried to do was to get them onto a global stage so that they could be showcased along with other works. And so we started Art House Contemporary, where we then showed artists that were existing in the market. We had then got documentation for them, transparency of price, and a secondary market to sell works that were already existing in the market. And that's where we started our dialogue between modern and contemporary art. And really, after Art House, we started our residency, which was again to expose our artists to other nationalities. So we had a cross-cultural dialogue between an artist from abroad and an artist in Nigeria, so that we could have that dialogue. And then we felt that there just wasn't enough going on in the global scene. Art House was there, which was a wonderful tool for Nigeria. And so then we started Art Space. We're participating here this year. And that was just to bring all the artists out onto the global stage.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for having me. I think if I'm to define my role, I would say what I'm trying to do with the All Africa Festival is really bring out the diversity, beauty, and complexity, right, of African culture in her entirety. And we do that through music, we do it through art, we do it through film. And one of the things that we always say when we introduce ourselves, or any part of my team and myself in particular, is we say Africa is not just the continent, it's her people. And her people are all over the world. And as people migrate, they have different cultural representations of their identity, of what it means to be Africa and what Africa means to them individually. I also say Africa is not a race either. So Africa, in our definition, doesn't mean black. We have all races under the sun, under the African cultural context. And moving to Dubai, so I have a corporate hat, so I have a corporate job. I'm a senior executive at a global multinational company. Moving to Dubai, it was clear to see, and moving to the UAE, it was clear to see that other cultures had created their own spaces, their own language, their own almost expression of themselves, and are sharing it across the board. And Africa seemed to be, from a cultural context perspective, one that hadn't yet done that, and I can understand why. Running the festival now since 2018, it's quite a complex story to tell, but it's a very beautiful one. So we just had our event in October in Budge Park, and as well as seeing Nigerian, South African, East African, and Egyptian artists, you also found a whole contingent from Trinidad and Tobago come and display what that culture means like to them and the representation from an African perspective. We had Cuba, we had Afro-Americans, we had Afro-Europeans, we had people come from Cape Verde, which was quite interesting as well for attendees. So I think what we want to do, and this role that I see myself playing, is really telling authentic but holistic African cultural stories through music, art, entertainment, and film.
Thank you. I think it's very interesting when we begin to define that scope of kind of bringing what is local to an international sphere. And I think that it's a space where we really have to be very much ethically aware and very much understanding of that culture. How does the role of locality transcend into that global sphere?
I think some of these things, like when it comes to art, is like these are sort of global languages or global things. I mean, that's why when you talk about music, a song from Uganda will be enjoyed by somebody from, I don't know, Iran or something like that. So I think that there's this distribution question that has not happened, and I think that's what we are all here trying to do, is trying to distribute. So the local, in my view, is extremely part of the global, mm-hmm. And the difference has been that certain cultures have not, certain places have not been on the same table with the rest of the world. One of the reasons we come to Abu Dhabi for this fair, my gallery, is to do that. But in this case, my international being the Middle East. So most people move towards the US and London. I am there, but so we have to be here. We have to be global. So for me, the local is very much a part of the global, and certain people have to make sure that has that sort of, it's like a table, and everybody needs to get a seat on that table.
I think it's very important to be here to show what we have. You know, we've brought two wonderful artists. One is contemporary and one is modern. And the whole thing about our gallery is showcasing the two together. And the modern artist we have is a 90-year-old man called Bruce Onubrekpai. And we brought a huge panel of his, which actually shows the culture of Nigeria. In fact, of 4 tribes in Nigeria: Yoruba, Igbo, sorry. And what he wanted to show in that was, you know, a king and all the tribal innuendos that we have, and it's very visible in that work, and it really showcases the difference between being African and the rest of the world, and yet having it on a center stage in the world so that people can learn from our cultures, we can learn from your culture. And it's so important for people for children, for anyone to actually see that work, or many works that have come from Africa, showing what our artists are exposed to and showcasing what they do. Of course, the contemporary, with the internet and with all the things, all the social media tools that we have, the artists are actually on a global platform, and so they're learning from each other through social media. And then you can see the cross-pollination of all the countries and all the artists because of the exposure they have to other works. And what we've brought with the contemporary is from the Nsuka school, which is a school that Ella Natsui really taught for 30 years and mentored. And, they work with recyclable materials from the environment. And we have Ngozi Imeje Azema, who's done an amazing, huge installation in the front of terracotta. And she's showing that in our booth as well. And it's about vases, which is, again, the cross-cultural, what we women have in pots and vases, and she's done that in terracotta. So we're very happy to bring female artists and showcase that.
And I think for me, one of the things I have realized as we have continued to do the festival here in the UAE is really the synergies between UAE culture and African culture. There's a lot of synergies, there's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of, and one of the things that I'm most proud about with the festival is the fact that even though it's an African festival about African culture, we actually have higher attendees from non-Africans. So this year, 45% of our attendees were actually Middle Eastern and from other cultures. Actually, the African population that attended the festival was only about, 30, 32, 31. So it shows that those stories are going wider. And one of our proudest moments was last year, where we were thinking of a way of really strengthening African art and bringing that to the forefront. And my partners and I had an installation on Boulevard Plaza, and it was really works of El Natsu, as well as Maggie Eto, Yao, Ishak, Sloan, and it was beautifully done outside Boulevard Plaza, open top, so you could see the Burj Khalifa, but that installation had a magical effect. Fast forward to this year, what that led to was the opening of a Fie Gallery here in Dubai, which is literally a gallery that shows African art and highlights African artists. And I believe they have a showing now of Yao's work, where he came and did a residency here, and he's using metal to basically highlight the synergies between the UAE culture as well as African culture coming from Ghana. I think those are the kind of things and powerful stories that go through us sharing culture and sharing cultural experiences. When we did this last year, we didn't think Ifeanyi Gallery would be a gallery that existed. We called it Ifeanyi Gallery to hold the art pieces, and Ifeanyi means home. But it's a really proud thing for me personally, as I've seen my partners take that away and really grow it into this big gallery that is getting notoriety in the UAE. And I'm hoping that when we do this again next year, it might be another gallery, but it might be film as well. So it's how do we take those African cultural sort of stories and then get them to that international standard, and then they stand alone at different projects. So I think there's so much synergy, but I think there's also so much openness in the UAE. Absolutely. There's so much openness, there's so much availability for you to come in and just create a space and a story and a narrative. And this is, I've lived in the UK, I've lived in Istanbul, and now I'm here in the UAE, and just that openness to be able to take something like this and do it, I think that for me is what is unique.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, when looking at the history of the UAE and the present, sort of the contemporary that we are living, it is about this exchange. It is about this openness, as you said. I think that also the UAE is the culmination of many cultures, in the same way that you guys are speaking about Africa as a whole and as a continent, and it's what leaves the UAE, and it's also what comes into the UAE that becomes interesting. I think the next question that I have for you is, and Nina, perhaps you could start again with this idea of sustainability. How do we make sure that what we're doing is not just a one-stop shop? You know, how can we continue to have this conversation where it becomes embedded within the cultural fabric? I'd be curious to hear perhaps stories or any successes that have happened, or thoughts on, you know, how to promote the sustainability throughout the future.
Yeah. And I think how to promote the sustainability comes from really what my partner puts it nicely, and she words it perfectly when she says sincerity of purpose, right? It is, why are you doing this in the first place? I think if I think of the festival this year, but Lord knows it was harder to execute it this year than it was last year, because last year was, you know, a stab in the dark. Nobody had ever done it before. And we're a non-alcohol event, and we've done that intentionally because we want to really invite and welcome a wider audience. So there was no precedent set, right? It was a stab in the dark. We'll do it the first year. And the first year was hugely successful. So coming into the second year, it was harder to execute this year. And I say into the second year because we changed the format from 2018. We started in 2018. It was all about food. We did it for 2 years. COVID happened. We took a break. We changed the format to make it about a holistic cultural representation. So food, art, everything else. 2021 was our first year in Budge Park, and then we did it this year. And I think what continues that sustainability is the sincerity of purpose. But it's also building the right partnerships and alliances. I think, and the UAE allows for that. I think if you have that sincerity of purpose, if you're in the right rooms, having the right conversations, then those partnerships that get formed, and then they also create longevity. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do is we are not trying to control the whole space. So this, for 2023, we're going to test a concept that we call a Frember, and a Frember just means Africa in the Burr months. So basically from the middle of October to somewhere in the middle of November, maybe we take it to the end of November, it's going to be a Frember in the UAE. And we're now having partnerships with other people to say, could we have a film festival? Could we have a fashion festival? Not something we run ourselves, but creating those spaces that create an ecosystem that actually makes it wider.
So a collaborative system.
Collaborative system, and bringing in the right partners, but the right competencies to be able to run that. So if you're someone sitting in New York and you're thinking, or you're sitting in London, or you're even in Joburg and you're thinking, when is the right time to come to the UAE to be able to experience a holistic African experience? Well, it's a Frember. And it's a 4 to 6 week period where from art to music to fashion to film to everything. So we're already having conversations to sort of test how that would work in 2023, and we bring little elements. But I think where the sustainability comes is really creating that atmosphere for collaboration, and where everybody has a role and a place and a seat on the table as well.
Go ahead.
Sustainability, I think what Nina said, the purpose, the sense of purpose. One, for me, it starts with being authentic and knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it, and caring enough. Like, no, these are not jobs when it comes to visual art. It's not, investment banking. It is giving. Artists give from inside. And I always say artists run out of, when you're older and you've been practicing for, let's say, 30, 40 years, you run out of what to give. So it starts with the authenticity of the creations, because that's the base of what we do. And then people like myself, or galleries, or curators, and all these other actors in the ecosystem, the next thing is really to build that ecosystem also in each of those elements to be authentic. So if we're talking about curators, they have to be authentic. They have to be looking for art. They shouldn't be looking for who they told them should be the one. They should be looking for art. They should go visit, dig, and find art. When it comes to critics, they should be critiquing art, not which gallery paid for them to critique, but more about trying to understand the art and critiquing it. So whether it's a gallerist, they should be really, have the integrity and authenticity. Because sustainability to me is when you do what you do without thinking you're doing it, without feeling like you're working. Like when you do what you do because that's what you do. And that true self will always grow and will always be nourished by your engagement, your continuous efforts. And if we do that, even in this really global confusion of how things are done, somehow it always comes through and it always can be seen. And I think that for me, that's what we need to do. Deal with the ecosystem with a lot of care.
How would you define authenticity?
I think authenticity, I'm not an English first speaker, I speak Luganda, but I think for me it's like, it is when you do things from your heart, when you do things with purpose, when you do things genuinely.
With an intention.
With your intentions and with real intentions. And it happens natural to people, but of course many factors in the world block that. Many factors, whether it's greed, whether it's whatever. So when you allow your spirit to shine, to exist without external factors.
What I really want to say with Africa and the Middle East, I think you've been very open and accepting us here. I mean, Sharjah has the Biennale and they have the Africa Institute, and she's brought a lot of importance to African artists that have been forgotten and not in the dialogue, especially with modern. And Dubai's had the art fair. In fact, in 2020, just before the pandemic, we sent a resident artist to Dubai to do the show. So she was staying in Dubai for about a month, but then it got cancelled, the show, and she had to go back home. But the thing that she did take back with her was working with saffron, because she went to see things in the market. And because she couldn't show her works that she had done, we had a show for her in Lagos. And the whole show was all about her works with saffron. And so they were all like bright orange, vivid colors, quite abstract. And it was like the connect between Africa and the Middle East. And this exposure, which is what we want to really continue because we have a residency, is to have that crossbreed of artists coming to us and seeing what our culture holds and seeing what the African culture holds, and for the Africans to see what is happening here and the platform for them to cross-pollinate. And of course, Abu Dhabi also with the fair here and bringing all of us here. So I think to have 3 areas in the Middle East, 3 parts in the UAE is quite phenomenal for us to showcase our art and become a conversation and a dialogue with the local scene.
Absolutely. I think to kind of wrap up this conversation, it becomes very interesting when you do bring in a culture that is, let's say, needs some sort of definition within a new space. So when I curate a show, for example, abroad, going into that space and really kind of debunking various myths, ideas, and elevating that conversation by showcasing the contemporary and really kind of highlighting that reality. My question always becomes, now how does that cross-pollination, continue, and how do we define that cross-pollination in a way where we're not just leaving our culture, somewhere and showcasing it, but actually really creating those, I guess, sustainable dialogues. Perhaps I think, the most human thing is a conversation. So how do we continue that where we can begin to showcase some sort of elevation and that cross-pollination? I think only then can we define it as cross-pollination. When there is a mix between one thing or one culture and the next.
Well, these are very difficult questions, but I think they always say the simplest always suffices, and I think that when we look at our the reasons why some of these things don't exist, why there's no cross-pollination, why art from a certain area is not, for example, art from Middle East is not known in my country,
Yeah.
So maybe it has to get known.
Yeah.
Maybe there's no market, but however, the idea of removing certain barriers that stop us from this lack of cross-pollination is the key to, and these are things about race, things about economies, things. So there are certain things in our society that stop the majority of people from breaking and entering and exchanging. And some are political and so on. So in our work as creatives, we have to continuously try to remove these barriers and be authentic. And what you're doing, it's like it is a gathering. So people gather, they enjoy that, and then they communicate, they speak, like you said, a conversation, and they start seeing each other as individuals, not as this or that. And that, plus whatever they do, and plus all their intentions, they can. It's a time-based process as well. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't expect it to happen today, but we should start walking that life today, so that eventually when you look up 10 years, whatever years, things are different. And time has taught us a lot of those things, that some collaborations happen because people put the right effort in those collaborations. So I hope it answers that difficult question.
Thank you.
I think one of the things I have learned over the last 2 years is it's important to create spaces where people can authentically share their stories. And by stories, it could be through music, it could be through art, it could be through whatever cultural form is. But what I've realized that ability to create spaces where people can authentically share their perspective is key to that cross-pollination. Because as a Nigerian, my expression of who I am is, as a Nigerian, you put 10 of us in this room, and our expression of culture as Nigerians will be very different. Mm-hmm. And no one is more relevant than the other. But it's authentically how we express ourselves. And I think the more we create those spaces, so be that back in Africa, be that in the UAE, be that in London, New York, wherever it is, the more we create those spaces where people can authentically start to express themselves from a cultural perspective, the more that pollination will happen. And even in the festival this year, just people learning about the fact that the whole Afro-Cuban culture is so strong, and a lot of people didn't realize it actually goes back to the Yoruba kingdom, the Oni of Ife, Asher, all of that, and they still use words that are actually lost in Yoruba language narrative today, but they still use them in Cuba. And understanding the power of that when you think of how many every hundreds of years migration into that region happened, regardless of how migration happened. But having that space to authentically tell that story from that perspective and make those connection of the dots is where you see the synergies happening. And we had Boo Designs from Senegal. This year was his second year at the festival. But what he does with the Darje family, while they're playing music, he's painting life on stage and telling those stories even in that art form. I think a lot of people see him on social media. He's the guy that paints upside down on social media and flips it around like magic, and we go, whoa. And a lot of people thought that was just, he couldn't be painting that fast, but he does. He does it in like 10, sometimes 8 minutes, and he does it live on stage, and just him just being able to express himself in that way and have that show. So I think the more we create spaces where people can just be authentically who they are and share their expressions of self, the more we see that pollination and collaboration. Because I see that happening already, even within the festival that we have.
Can I just add that I feel that artists have a universal language, but they're obviously subject to their social, political, and regions that they live in. But when you put them together, there's a dialogue, especially in the contemporary, of similarities that they achieve. And I think the art fairs, social media, all that has allowed artists to really become sort of one body and able to showcase what their experiences are compared to, say, an experience in the Middle East or in America. And all these, what's wonderful is that we're able to go to all these art fairs. There's so many of them. There's so many biennales. There's so many things for the art world, tools rather for the art world, spaces that we can go to, residencies where African artists are being invited and vice versa. That I think the dialogue is cross-pollinating, and it's showcasing how we can harmoniously live together and showcase what we have, our strength, and also merging with the world and learning from others and incorporating all of that into the art that we have as well.
Thank you very much. I am happy to open up the questions to the audience if there are any. I see 2 hands up.
Thanks very much. I was really looking forward to this panel, and you guys have all been great. I have 2 questions, but one of them is super quick, and the other one is a regular length, I guess. The first one, is there a reason that this is titled Sub-Saharan Africa? Because I know that the UAE has had different relationships with different parts of Africa, like the Sudan or the Maghreb over the years. And I don't know if this is because you are from sub-Saharan countries or if there's a particular focus right now in terms of artistic or cultural relationships between the UAE and sub-Saharan Africa. That's my first question. And the second one is more for Daudi. I know your work really well. I think you do so many interesting things, and what's really interesting to me is that you work between the nonprofit and the commercial realm in terms of the biennial you started, the magazine you started, and you also do your commercial gallery. The market enables exchange because there's a collector base, and then people bring those works to another country. And often the market enables exchange where money wouldn't go otherwise, because there has to be some kind of reason for money to flow. And unless there's, like a state priority to invest in a certain country, the market sometimes gets there first. And I'm curious on why you, who kind of have a non-commercial head, if you don't mind my saying, I'm not calling you a bad gallerist, but I think your ambitions are beyond the art dealer realm, why you've chosen to think through Afri-Art as well as your other projects.
I won't answer the first one because I'm a guest. But the the non-profit side of what I do and the for-profit side of what I do, I think one feeds the other. The non-profit are the things that that don't make money. So the financial sustainability for them is a bit complicated. But they are important for the things that make money. So it's important to have a biennale, for example, because it brings together artists from all over the world into one space, and that creates something that, the cross-pollination thing, that then creates conversations, and it makes the art move on. The magazine was created to document art activity in Uganda before we build a museum. We don't have a museum in Uganda, so we need to get a museum. So before we do that, this is 2007, we record if somebody has an exhibition, there's an article written about it, so that when the museum is built in 2040 something, we are able to go back to these stories and say, oh, this show, what happened? Where's the work for this show? How can we bring it back? How can we create a timeline of what has happened until then? So for me, the non-profit activities that I do are to support the ecosystem, and the commercial part, the gallery, allows me to be able to put back in the non-profit element. I always talk about money as a thing that personally is such a tool that is the least important in this, yet, it's like oil in a car, whatever, but it is good when it is used to do the things, to make the car move, right? Rather than to be stored in a can. So for me, money has to help things move forward.
I can answer your first question, Melissa. So with regards to Sub-Saharan Africa, yes, of course, all of the panelists are from Sub-Saharan Africa. There is an interest now through the UAE, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that is looking at this, again, cross-pollination, the idea of connection. Of course, being citizens of the Global South, there are already many kind of moments or feelings that are mutually shared. So I hope that answers your quick question with a quick answer. Any other questions?
Hi, thank you everyone for this amazing talk. I think, like you said, Daudi, global doesn't just mean everything in relation to the US and Europe. Global means the whole world, and it's so exciting to have you guys here and discuss this. And you mentioned that, giving a platform to artists from around the world, especially African artists here for you, is really important. And I just want to know your personal interests. What kind of stories would you want to hear African perspectives and Emirati or Gulf perspectives on? Stories, ideas, maybe things you've already seen artists explore together here, or things you'd like to see when we think about mutual creative development.
That's a good question. I think really it's up to them to define what stories they want to share. I think the best way I think of it is I imagine it as a child standing and looking at all of this around them, and the perspective I want that child to go away with. So if it's an African child, I want them to go away with a sense of pride, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. Right? A sense of belonging that even in this place that many would not call their motherland or their fatherland, I belong, right? And an Emirati child or a Middle Eastern child, I want them to be able to stand, look around and think of how big the potential is, right? How big this new world I'm exposed to. And more importantly, a change of perception. Because I think a lot of us look at life through a perception lens, and sometimes that perception could be ours, but it could be perception of other people. And I want to create an environment where people can come and question some of the perceptions and learn from each other. So I think for me, I always, when I think of what I do within the All Africa Festival, I don't look at it at the lens of the adults that are attending that event. I'm looking at it at the lens of the next generation that are attending that event and what I want them to walk away from this feeling. So as an African child, belonging, sense of pride, sense of purpose, and look at the amount of talent, and it is endless. I remember I was always arty as a child. So I used to draw, I used to paint, I used to write, I loved poetry. But as a Nigerian child, when I was growing up, if you're not a lawyer, doctor, or engineer, it wasn't a choice, it wasn't an option. And I think I love what I see, what's happening in the African creative space, where you see people pursuing, their talent and their passion in a way that I didn't feel I had the same space to do while growing up. And then using that as an expression as to how I share cultural experiences, for me, is powerful. It's powerful. So that's what I'd like. I'd like the sense of purpose, and then also that the Emirati child looking at it and thinking about, wow, the possibilities.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. That wraps us up. I appreciate having you all here. Was there another question? No? Okay, I thought we were walking somewhere. Oh, there is? Okay, please, one more, sorry.
Hi, thank you so much. I love this panel. I have a question, just going back to what you just said, Nina. I really relate to everything you said, especially the fact that, growing up, you had to, be a doctor or an engineer. And just thinking of today's kids, and if you were to tell them a message, because, it's a decision. Some of us might think, you know what, I'm just going to follow what everyone else tells me. And others might go like, no, I'm going to keep going, no matter what happens in the world around me. So what would you say to young artists as a message for them moving forward? Thank you.
I think the one thing COVID has taught us is almost a sense of protecting self, right? COVID has taught us that. I don't think I have heard a lot about people being more in tune with what they are from a mental health perspective, mental space perspective, as I have heard it since COVID. What I would, and I do this now with my kids, so I have 2 kids. I have one that has already decided he wants to be a lawyer and he wants to go to Harvard Law. And I'm like, great, let's figure out how to start working on scholarships. And I have one that will probably be a gamer, a YouTuber, or an artist. He hasn't yet decided. And I'm comfortable with each of them taking that path. There isn't pressure on my older one. He's 13. He's going to have a long time to try and figure out wherever life navigates him, right? And I studied law, and now I'm in HR and doing a festival in the Middle East. So I think for them, it's do what gives you that psychological satisfaction, because life will throw obstacles up, down, sideways, but in the end, whatever gives you that psychological satisfaction, that psychological happiness, even though sometimes you might hate it, whatever that is, do that.
Thank you. Any more questions? All right. that wraps us up. I'd like to say thank you, and this was a really very enjoyable talk. I think we're all more awake now than we were when we first got here. And I hope that we get to continue this conversation and kind of continue this progression between both regions. Thank you very much.